bounds.
So when trade or innovation leads to a gain in productivity and the loss of a job, there's no reciprocal benefit to wages for the middle class. The replacement job is sure to come at a much lower real wage. As a result, we've been left with a heavily indebted economy that's still led by consumption. Our system rewards debtors and punishes savers. It makes long-term capital investments nearly impossible because of the economic volatility and financial risk caused by inflation. Worst of all, our system requires everyone become a speculator because there's no other way to safeguard your savings. Now, what the gold standard really does is ensure a level playing field for all economic actors, borrowers, lenders, and even governments. That's why bankers who are always highly leveraged, the media barons who consistently borrow to buy more properties, and governments which can never balance their budget, all abhor the gold standard. They want to maintain their power, so they need this paper money to exist. Now, the system we have now and those who profit from it would not survive a transition back to the gold standard. But little known reality of our paper money system is that it robs our currency and gains to purchase, and it robs the currency of gains to purchasing power. Now, this means the average person is working harder, producing more, but they cannot buy as much as they used to. Meanwhile, asset prices soar. The wealthy become wealthier, and the value of everything they own becomes inflated along with our currency. And this explains why the wealth gap has grown so much since 2000. And it also explains, the thing is, quantitative easing, corporate bailouts, overspending, overtaxation, just a horrible mismanagement of our earnings, of our tax dollars. This is part of the problem. It's not something that we're going to solve overnight. But it's something that needs to be known. It's something that needs to be understood. It's something that needs to be considered. Now, these policies accomplish nothing other than making rich rich and the poor poor. And it destroys our world's faith in the US dollars. But our paper money does one other thing. And this could ultimately bring about its own demise. It steals from the creditors. Now, as explained earlier, borrowers today will repay their debts in a devalued dollar. That's a bad deal for lenders. And as stated at this point, America, as it's dependent, America is pretty much dependent on its lenders to sustain our standard of living. However, governments and entities around the world that hold U.S. debt have grown tired of watching the value of those obligations inflated away. And they're probably facing a mutiny on the dollar. When this happens and the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, you're going to see other countries coming forward. China and Russia probably at the forefront of that. So keep in mind, this is something that realistically we could be facing here pretty soon. It's 2016 and it's coming to the end of the fourth quarter 2016. We might see something happen midway through this next administration or sooner. And it's not going to be a gradual with a lot of signs ahead of time, because the signs are already here. I mean, this should already have happened. So the signs aren't something to keep an eye out for. More than likely, it's going to be something that's going to, like an overnight, a thief in the night, in the blink of an eye. Now, the mutiny on the dollar, for many years now, it's been clear that China would soon be pulling the strings in the United States financial system. After all, the American people now owe the Chinese government nearly $1.5 trillion. That's big numbers. They don't mean much to most people, but keep in mind, this tab is now hundreds of billions of dollars more than what the U.S. government collects in all income taxes. Now, both corporate and individual, every year. Is basically a sum we can never, ever hope to repay, at least not by normal means, of course. And the Chinese aren't stupid. They realize that we are both trapped. We have we're stuck with an enormous debt that we can never realistically pay, and the Chinese are trapped with an outstanding loan they can never expect to get a payment for. And the Chinese government is now taking a radical approach. China is now engaged in a full-fledged currency war with the United States, and the ultimate goal is that the Chinese have publicly stated is to create a new dominant world currency to dislodge the US dollar from its current reserve role and recover as much of the $1.5 trillion that the US government has borrowed as possible. And the Chinese need to do a couple of things to make their yuan a global currency. First, they have to establish a bilateral trading agreement with various countries. Russia is definitely going to be on board with that. And currently, all international trade is done in dollars. But these bilateral agreements mean that trade can clear in China's own currency, bypassing the dollar. So in other words, you have to find people who are willing to hold the yuan instead of holding the dollar. And the following countries, I believe, will be the ones to do this. Russia, definitely. Africa, I believe, is going to be on that list. A couple of the other European nations may possibly be on that list. And some of the Middle Eastern countries will be on that list. I don't think we'd have countries like Saudi Arabia exclusively jumping ship, but I definitely think that they will probably be doing some backdoor deals, and maybe even a percentage of their trades will be done in the Chinese yuan. Now, the next thing that China is going to want to do after that is to make their currency choice for debt. And we're seeing this happen. And it's turned off by super low interest rates and the constant money printing. Entrepreneurs and investors are starting to turn away from the dollar. They're looking for stability in a new kind of financial product called the dim sum bond. This is simply a regular bond denominated in Chinese currency. And the biggest threat to your wealth if it's held in the dollar. Okay, it represents growth in the issuance of dim sum bonds. The volumes are still low, but they're growing rapidly. And it won't be long before more corporate debt is issued in yuan than in the dollar. When this happens, that's the end. The dollar won't come back from that. Now, but keep in mind that the China's gold holdings are still not anywhere close to where the U.S. holdings are, but it's rapidly approaching that mark. And it's producing more gold and silver than anybody else in the world by a very large number. It's reinvesting its money, about 90% of it, back into the gold market. And it also is encouraging its citizens to invest and to hold gold. So as a nation, they're choosing to do this. And I just don't see that the U.S. as a nation is doing it. There are a lot of people out there, but I'd say the percentage of the average American that is deciding to buy and hold into precious metals, I would suggest that number probably be about 1/4, 1/4. One out of every 4 Americans sees this and does anything active to take action to keep their money in an intrinsic value and to hedge their future against the inflationary problems of the dollar losing its purchase power. All right, so by building a huge stockpile of gold, China will be able to back their currency with the world's traditional form of money. And once they make the yuan freely convertible into gold, they will have created a tremendous demand for their bonds and bills by making their currencies the world's most reliable. And the impact on the dollar will be catastrophic, if not the end. Now, the future of America, if you look around the world economy, is 2 dominant trends. First, major Western companies are impoverished by their debts and are struggling to avoid a collapse via desperate attempts to print their way out of perdition. And second, the rise of the world's largest future economy in the midst of a massive effort to buy gold and control the global market. The future will be dominated by surges in economic activity around the world on the heels of a massive monetary stimulus. America is at a turning point unlike anything our country has ever experienced. Now, you can be optimistic and believe that our country will eventually take actions to right this catastrophic imbalance that threatens to collapse our country, our morality, and our culture. But if you're too optimistic, then you'll be able to create the necessary. If you're too optimistic, then it's going to end up being too late before we can make these changes. We can help our friends, our families, and our neighbors of the parasitic values that plague our nation. More than likely, we can. Will we? It doesn't look good. Enough people do not seem to be taking interest into what needs to be done and the actions that need to be taken. And there still is a continuance to put your investments and your trust into the financial industries, the banking industries, and into the stocks, the stock market, speculative markets, rather than keeping it into actual assets of intrinsic value. So with that in mind, I encourage you to go out there, do your own research, possibly do your own money management, adjust it according to the information that you discover, and decide what's best for you, your future, your family, your friends, and continue to dig out your own salvation. So with that, I wish you farewell, and I wish the best for all of you. And I really do hope that we can turn our nation back into the great nation and hope of the world that it once was. So good luck to you all, and take care.